Aisle that erases. A man entered and asked if the aisle that erases had claimed anyone recently. I froze behind the counter, halfway through stacking the last of the instant ramen. His voice carried a weight I couldn't place, like an echo of a memory I almost remembered. He looked ordinary enough. Brown jacket, neat hair, but the familiarity prickled across the back of my neck. I shook it off. That aisle erases? I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded once, sharply, and smiled like he'd been waiting for me to understand. You've noticed it, then? I hadn't. Not really. Not yet. The store had been quiet all night, save for the usual hum of the fluorescent lights. My eyes wandered across the shelves. Everything seemed normal, but there was a flicker, subtle, in the corner of my vision. A pack of gum on the top shelf, the last one, blinked out, as if it had never existed. I blinked. It was gone. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. He stepped closer. There was a faint scent of rain on him, though the lot outside was dry. You'll see. I wanted to laugh, wanted to chalk it up to sleep deprivation. But the screen above the counter caught my attention, the security feed flickered. One camera, the one that looked down the back aisle, went black for a moment before returning. The aisle, my aisle, looked wrong. Warped. Empty. What aisle? I asked, forcing steadiness into my voice. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head, watching me. I felt the unease twist in my stomach. I had worked this shift countless times, alone at night, and I knew these shelves. Every corner, every aisle, but one row, between frozen foods and the cleaning supplies, had always been slightly narrower than it should have been. I'd chalked it up to a construction quirk. But now I realized I hadn't remembered what had been there before. Come on, he said softly, gesturing toward the back. His voice was a nudge, a push I couldn't resist. I followed. The aisle was dimmer than the rest of the store, even though the lights overhead were the same fluorescent white. It smelled faintly of plastic and damp. I tried to remember what I had stocked there last week, cans, boxes, something. But nothing surfaced. My memory was a blank. I thought there'd be, I muttered. He didn't finish me. He only nodded. I took a step in. The fluorescent hum dropped a tone, and I realized the sound of my own footstep had vanished midair, leaving a gap of silence that pressed against my eardrums. I turned around. The man was still behind me, just outside the aisle, watching, calm. I noticed then that a bag of chips on the lower shelf had disappeared. No crumpled packaging, no crumbs. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. This aisle, I said quietly, it takes things. Not just things, he said. It takes presence, sequence, memory. I laughed nervously. I don't understand. He took a step closer. The aisle seemed to stretch just a little, longer than it should have been. The tiles warped under my gaze, like a reflection in a disturbed mirror. And then I realized. The cans I had stocked an hour ago, I remembered putting them there, weren't there anymore. The memory of putting them there was real, but the objects themselves were gone. What do you mean, it takes memory? I asked, my voice rising. He smiled faintly. You've noticed things missing. You've felt it, haven't you? That flicker of wrongness. That gap in continuity. I glanced toward the counter. My register had beeped a few minutes ago, but I had no recollection of what had rung up. Even the total, the coins, the transaction, erased. I tried to turn back toward him, but he had moved. Or maybe I hadn't seen him move. My perception felt fractured. The aisle seemed to pulse, a subtle ripple along the shelves, and I realized the fluorescent lights weren't steady, they shimmered, as if the world itself was being rewritten around me. I wanted to run, but the aisle, it drew me in. Step by step, I felt the edges of reality dissolve. The products vanished quietly. A row of soda cans, a rack of frozen dumplings, even the floor beneath my shoes seemed thinner, less substantial. People? I asked, voice barely a whisper. Has it taken anyone? The man's gaze softened, just slightly. It doesn't always take everything. Sometimes it leaves a trace. A shadow. A whisper. Sometimes. He hesitated. Sometimes it finishes with someone before they notice they're gone. I looked back. The security monitor blinked again. One of the other aisles, the one near the bathrooms, had gone completely blank. Not just black. Nothing. No distortion, no static, just an absence. I turned to him. I don't understand. Why? Why are you asking? He tilted his head, and for a moment the flicker in his eyes matched the shifting shelves. Because it might have finished with me. My heart stuttered. The words didn't make sense. But there it was, hovering in the air like a fragile crystal. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was checking. Checking whether the aisle had claimed his previous self. The thought made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And then, as I glanced back down the aisle, I saw something that made me stumble. My own reflection in the freezer glass, flickering. Not steady, not complete. Parts of me were missing. A hand, a cheek, a patch of hair. The reflection was wrong, fragmentary. I took another step. The tiles warped further. The end of the aisle seemed farther away than it had seconds before. I could hear the faint echo of my own breathing, but even that faltered and dropped out mid-phrase, leaving only silence. Why? I whispered. He shook his head. It doesn't need a reason. It just aligns things. Erases, reshapes, makes the world coherent again by removing what doesn't fit. I swallowed. The chill of the fluorescent air pressed into my lungs. I realized I couldn't remember the last customer. Couldn't remember the time. My own shift. Fragmented. Small items I had placed on shelves earlier were gone. Even the faint buzzing of the refrigerators was intermittent, fading in and out. Does it take people completely? I asked, voice shaking. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down the aisle, eyes softening, almost wistful. It doesn't always. But sometimes, yes. People, sequences, moments, erased. As if they never existed. And sometimes, it leaves a fragment. A shadow. A question. A man standing here, wondering what has been lost. The words sank into me. I tried to shake them off. Tried to rationalize. But as I glanced down the aisle again, I saw movement, or rather, absence. A stack of canned soup had vanished entirely. Even the outline of the shelf where they had been was gone, replaced by blank air. The fluorescent lights rippled across the void. I need to call someone, I said. The phone on the counter was gone. My own hand reached for it, but only emptiness met my fingers. The line of shelves to my right shimmered, bending slightly. I blinked. One of the aisle markers, frozen foods, had disappeared entirely. I couldn't remember ever seeing it. He stepped forward, closer than before. You see, he said quietly, it doesn't just erase the object. It erases your certainty, your memory of it, your presence around it. I backed up. The floor under my shoes warped. The hum of the lights stuttered and died. A faint, mechanical clatter from the back room, the register, fizzled into silence. The world felt thin. And then I understood. The aisle wasn't just a place. It was an event. A revision. A slow, quiet unraveling. I tried to remember his face from before, from when he first entered. But I couldn't. The edges blurred. A memory I couldn't hold. And yet, he was still there. Watching. Waiting. Not afraid. Not curious. Only patient. Why are you here? I asked, the words trembling. He looked down the aisle again, then back at me. Because I need to know if my previous self is gone. Finished. If the aisle has done its work. I felt a nausea rise in my chest. A fear not of being hurt, but of being unmade. My own presence, already fraying at the edges, felt like smoke slipping through fingers. I stumbled backward. The aisle stretched again. The walls shimmered. I could see the glimmer of lost objects, fragments of existence, the chips, the cans, the gum, floating just beyond perception. Shadows of things that might have been. He didn't move. He only waited. And I realized, finally, that I was standing in a place where the rules didn't apply. Where memory and matter and identity were optional. Where a man could ask about the aisle that erases, and mean something far darker than curiosity. I looked at him, trying to grasp a last thread of recognition. Trying to remember if I had known him before. But the memory slipped, and I could feel it being pulled away, erased. The fluorescent hum returned, faint and distorted. The aisle seemed normal. Or as normal as anything could be. But I knew the truth now. Nothing in that aisle stayed. Not objects. Not sounds. Not sequences. Not people. And I knew, in the quiet fold of dread that settled over me, that the man hadn't come to ask about the aisle out of curiosity. He had come to see if it had finished its work. If it had, he might finally exist here again. If not, he would remain only as a question, a fragment, a shadow among the shelves. I stepped back, almost against the counter, trying to steady myself. The store lights flickered once more, and I thought I saw the man's face shimmer. Or perhaps it was mine. Either way, the aisle waited. And I understood, finally, that nothing, no thing, no person, was permanent there. I didn't speak. I couldn't. And I didn't move. Because even noticing was fragile. And noticing could vanish. The store remembers. The store's lights dimmed every time I thought about leaving. I first noticed it around 2 in the morning, my shift already stretched thin, my back sore from stocking shelves that never seemed empty. A soft, almost imperceptible yellow haze settled over the fluorescent bulbs whenever I glanced toward the door. At first, I thought it was fatigue, the afterimage of staring at the exit too long. But the change wasn't random. The lights didn't flicker when a customer passed, or when a box tipped over. They dimmed when I considered leaving. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the notion. The store had been quiet all night, save for the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the overhead lights. Outside, the parking lot was empty, pale streaked with streetlight and shadow. I was alone, as usual. But every time I looked toward the exit, the bulbs seemed to draw inward, curling their light into something thinner, colder. I tried to focus on the counter, the registers, the snacks stacked in neat rows. The dimming stopped. A soft relief, like inhaling after a held breath. I told myself I was imagining it. Until I reached for a bag of chips on the top shelf, and my reflection in the freezer glass blinked before I did. Not a literal blink, a delay, a hesitancy, a fractional mismatch. My hand moved first, and then my reflection followed. The air tasted faintly metallic, like copper. I swallowed. I didn't leave. Hours passed. The store remained the same, and yet different. The aisles seemed slightly longer than before, the tiles subtly warped. Items I'd stocked earlier shifted imperceptibly. A box of tea on the bottom shelf would be on the middle row when I looked again, or a pack of gum would face the wrong way. I convinced myself it was careless placement, tired eyes. Then I realized the clocks had stopped. Not on time, not a few minutes off, frozen. The second hand hung at 2:17 a.m. in every corner of the store. I hadn't noticed when it had happened. My memory didn't hold that moment. Perhaps I had looked away. Perhaps the store had never let me notice. I thought about leaving. The thought brushed against me lightly, a tendril of intention. The lights dimmed before I even walked. My reflection in the glass shimmered with the effort of consideration. A distant freezer fan clicked, stuttered, and fell silent for a heartbeat. I didn't move. Minutes, hours, I had no sense of how long, passed in that suspended state. I tried to distract myself, restock shelves, check the registers. Every action felt faintly wrong. The products were heavier, the labels unfamiliar. I stocked a row of energy drinks I didn't remember buying. A bag of flour appeared at my feet, though the shelf had been empty. I glanced at the aisle markers. One of them had changed names. I had no memory of it being anything else. And yet, something familiar tugged at me, an impression that I had tried to leave before. That I had walked toward the door, or thought about walking, and stopped. But I couldn't remember why. The memory was a fog, a fragment of thought that evaporated the moment I tried to hold it. I started testing it. I'd imagine opening the door, stepping onto the cold asphalt outside. The lights would flare, dim, or hesitate. My reflection would lag behind again, like a hesitant twin. I tried imagining walking toward the back of the store instead. The light brightened. A sense of relief passed through the air, as though the store itself exhaled. I realized then that the lights weren't reacting to me physically. They were reacting to my intention. The realization chilled me. The store wasn't just a building, it was a conscious space, aware of me, reading the contours of my thought. I didn't feel trapped, exactly. But the knowledge pressed against the edges of my mind. Every thought of leaving was monitored, anticipated, reflected back at me in subtle, insidious ways. I tried leaving. I walked to the door. My hand hovered above the handle. The bulbs above me dimmed to near black. I froze. In the glass, my reflection shivered and fractured, duplicating in impossible angles. I could see myself from slightly behind, slightly to the side, my face twisted in uncertainty I hadn't felt. The door handle shimmered, then seemed to sink into the wood. A faint hum rose in the air, like static, like the building itself was thinking, waiting. I stepped back. The lights recovered. Everything seemed normal again, the aisles straight, the tiles flat. But the unease remained, and I could feel the store watching. Anticipating. Synchronizing. Over the next few hours, the store grew subtle patterns of its own. Shelves shifted slightly when I looked away, forming narrow corridors or dead ends. Products I needed appeared in the wrong place, as though to draw me into longer, wandering paths. The registers would beep once, twice, but the transaction I remembered didn't exist. Coins vanished from my hand. Pens rolled backward across the counter, landing where I hadn't put them. I tried to track time. I checked my phone. No signal. The screen flickered once, showing the correct time, then went blank. I tapped it again. The store lights dimmed slightly, as though annoyed at my insistence. I set it down. The air thickened, as though it weighed against me, pressing. I thought about leaving again. This time, more intentionally, with the resolve of finality. The lights dimmed before the thought fully formed. The floor beneath my shoes seemed to compress, like the building itself was holding me back. I looked into the freezer reflections. My face was there, but incomplete, missing a corner of my mouth, a fragment of an eyebrow. The edges of my hands blurred, fingers fading into nothingness. And then a flicker of memory struck. I had tried leaving before. Not just imagined it, tried it. My hand on the handle, my foot stepping out, and then nothing. I had stood at the counter again, convinced I'd never left. The store erased not only the act, but the awareness of the act itself. I had lived in erased loops of myself, and I didn't know. I staggered back, realizing that leaving wasn't impossible. The store didn't block me physically. It blocked my thought. It synchronized with my hesitation, mirrored my uncertainty, and extended it. Every flicker, every distorted reflection, every subtle shift of shelves was a measure of my unwillingness, or my inability, to commit fully to leaving. I tried to anchor myself. I touched shelves, counted products, memorized aisles. But even that was unreliable. The more I engaged, the more I felt the store's influence seep into me. A pack of gum vanished, and I knew it had never been there, or maybe it had, and I'd lost that memory too. My hands shook. I caught my reflection again. The corner of my eye erased, the jawline warped, the hairline shifted. I looked more like the store wanted me to be, less like myself. Time became irrelevant. My thoughts of leaving grew frantic, desperate. Each one was intercepted, dimmed, reflected, stretched. I realized, quietly, that the store wasn't a trap. It wasn't a cage. It was a mirror, a slow, patient sculptor of identity. The longer I stayed, the more it learned me. The more I hesitated, the more it became me. I tried to leave again. The bulbs dimmed before I even reached the door. I looked into the glass and saw a face I didn't fully recognize, a self assembled from fragments, some of them mine, some of them borrowed, all of them mutable. I understood, suddenly, that leaving was irrelevant. The store didn't care about doors or exits. It cared about thought, about intention, about the erosion of certainty. I stepped back. The fluorescent lights returned to their usual hum. The aisles straightened, tiles flattened, products aligned. Everything was normal, except me. And I realized, finally, that I didn't need to be trapped physically. I didn't need walls or locks. The store had all the tools it needed. My hesitation, my uncertainty, my memory. And with those, it could fold me into its structure, reshape me quietly, imperceptibly. I leaned against the counter, exhausted. My reflection blinked normally, my hands appeared whole again. But the sensation lingered. The store was patient, always patient, and I understood that it didn't just react to thought. It synchronized with it. It waited for doubt. It grew stronger as I wavered. I looked at the door. The lights dimmed fractionally, just for a heartbeat. I smiled faintly, though my mouth felt strange. My reflection smiled with me, but off. Not quite me. I stepped away, and the store waited. For the next thought. For the next hesitation. For the next piece of me it could fold into its quiet architecture. I stayed. And I understood that the longer I stayed, the more I would become it. Not trapped. Not imprisoned. Simply, synchronized. And that was enough.